Welcome. My name is Peter Strong. I'm a professional psychotherapist specializing in mindfulness therapy, and I offer online treatment for driving phobia using mindfulness therapy. And all my sessions are delivered via Skype, which is not only very convenient but also a very effective way of teaching you how to overcome driving phobia using the well-tested methods of mindfulness-based exposure therapy. So the basic principle here is that you set up a series of challenges, driving a certain stretch of road that you have a problem with, but then training very carefully using mindfulness training before you do each challenge. That's the key factor here that makes it very different than traditional exposure therapy, where you just keep repeating the fearful activity until you somehow overcome that fear just by habit, by habituation. I mean, that can work sometimes, but often it's not enough. It's much better if you train how to resolve that anxiety before you actually do the challenge. So the way we go about doing this is to play through the challenge in your mind, imagine driving that stretch of road, to specifically look for the anxiety reaction, the habitual emotional reaction. Then when you find that anxiety, you then work on changing the relationship that you have with that emotion. This is really very, very important. So typically, we don't have a relationship with our anxiety. We just blindly react. We become that anxiety. This is called reactive identification. So that's the primary issue here, is we blindly become afraid the moment that we imagine that trigger, that particular trigger that we might encounter on that stretch of road. So with mindfulness training, we're overcoming this habit, this habitual emotional reaction. So we play through that scene, we look for the triggers, and then when we see the anxiety, instead of just blindly becoming overwhelmed by it, we then respond to it consciously or mindfully. Typically, we respond with a relationship that's completely full of conscious awareness, really seeing that emotion very clearly, but as an object, as an emotion that arises within you, instead of becoming identified with it. We see it as a mental object. That's the very foundation of successful change here. We have to stop identifying with the anxiety. We have to see it for what it really is, which is a mental object that gets triggered in the mind through habitual conditioning. So when we see the anxiety, we greet it as an object. We might say, I see you, fear, and then we respond by increasing that conscious awareness, by embracing that fear with friendliness or compassion, a very important feature of mindfulness. Mindfulness is not just awareness, it's the ability to embrace an experience fully with consciousness and this quality of friendliness, which is really a higher form of consciousness. It makes you more conscious, more present for that experience. Now, this is very important, not only because it breaks that habit, which of course simply feeds the habit, but it now creates a different relationship with that mental object, a relationship with a higher part of your being, which we call your true self, that is able to observe the anxiety. So the observer, that is your true self, the one that can embrace the fear without reacting and without identifying. Now, the nature of the true self is that it does not have any fear at all. It is fearless by nature. So when you bring that fearless quality that's caring for the mental object, the fear, you then establish a relationship that promotes healing and resolution of that fear instead of feeding it. So we learn to form a stable, non-reactive relationship in which we embrace that fear. We then look at its structure, because that's very important for healing any kind of emotional suffering, whether it's anxiety or obsessive thoughts, intrusive thoughts, whether it's traumatic memories, whatever the nature of that emotional suffering, it's vital that we look at the structure of what actually makes it work. And in the case of emotions, the structure is in the form of imagery. That is how the mind works. That is how it creates emotions. It creates internal imagery that holds together emotional energy into a particular emotion, like fear or anger or obsession or addiction, whatever it might be. So we look at the imagery of the anxiety, and then we work on changing that imagery. We help the imagery resolve itself, because that is how the emotion will resolve itself. It has to change that imagery in order to heal. This is a natural process that operates in the mind. This is how the mind processes emotion. It changes its imagery. In mindfulness work, we are simply speeding up that process of changing the imagery, because we bring in consciousness and the wisdom and choice that comes along with consciousness. So classically, we might look at changing the size of the emotional imagery, the fear. We might make it smaller. We may change its position. Instead of being very large and overwhelming, we might change it and move it to beside us. Put it on the passenger seat. Make it very, very small, like a child. All of these ways of interacting with that imagery will help it heal, will help it diminish in intensity. So that's what we will be exploring during these online therapy sessions. I will teach you how to do this, how to work with your anxiety, with your phobia, to first break that habit of reactive identification, which feeds it and prevents it from healing, and then by working with the imagery, to change that imagery to diminish the anxiety completely, until you can imagine doing that challenge without any fear. Then is the time to do the challenge. So we train before doing the challenge. Then you do the challenge, and if any anxiety arises, your training will help you process that emotion very fast, on the spot, as it arises. And then we might do some more mindfulness training after the challenge, processing any fresh anxiety that arose. In the same way, we change our relationship to that anxiety, in which we become the observer, the anxiety becomes the object. We look at developing a friendly, compassionate relationship with that fear, which of course is exactly what it needs to let go of its own fear. And then we work on changing the imagery until we can successfully reimagine that challenge that we just did without any anxiety. Then, after a short break, we would repeat that challenge. And we keep cycling through in this very structured and strategic way until we're able to do the challenge without any anxiety at all. That's our goal. Then, after that, we might move on to another challenge, perhaps a more difficult challenge. But we just apply the same process, mindfulness-based exposure therapy. You have to expose yourself to that challenging environment. That's obvious. We need to do that. You cannot overcome anxiety by avoiding that stretch of road. That will not work. That is a form of reactivity that will simply feed the fear even more. So no avoidance. We continue doing this until at a certain point there's what we call a breakthrough, which simply means that the mind is able to globalize our experience, and all of those anxiety habits start to just fall away. We transcend the anxiety habit altogether, and then we are able to drive under any conditions. So this is just basic training. And as you know, the more you train in any activity, the more that you're able to develop confidence and skills to manage things in real time without problem. So the training lays a foundation that makes mindfulness-based exposure therapy very effective for overcoming driving phobias and highway anxiety and other kinds of anxiety as well. If you would like to get started with me on this mindfulness approach to overcoming your driving phobia, please contact me and let's schedule a Skype therapy session. Therapy sessions are usually an hour long. Sometimes I do them with you in the car as you are approaching one of your challenges. So this approach is very effective. I have worked with many people over the years, and it's considerably more effective than conventional talking therapy, and it's certainly a much better solution than medications. Medications, of course, will not change anything. It will not change the underlying habits that cause your emotional reactions. So if you'd like to overcome your driving anxiety, please contact me. Most people see significant changes within the first 3 or 4 sessions. That's what I usually tell people to expect. You should see substantial improvements after 3 or 4 sessions. So if you'd like to get started with me, please contact me and we can schedule your first Skype therapy session, and I will teach you these methods of how to work with driving phobia. Thank you.